I'm pleased that we have the representatives of the Transportation Research Board here. I don't know if Catherine Porter was in the room yet. Hello, Catherine. Welcome.
Good morning.
We have Don from the National Conference on Weights and Measures. Good morning, Don. Thanks for coming. We have Cami from NIOSH and Shanky. Good morning. We'll sit together. It's very convenient. We also have Terry Mercer from the Rhode Island Public Utilities Commission, the new regulator from the SFMTA, San Francisco, Scott Leone, Chris Kermer from the Maryland Public Utilities Commission, and we've been trying to get him here for a long time, Charles Harvey from Nevada. Is he here? Charles, are you here? Are you up yet? Where are you, Charles? Oh, there you are. Welcome. By the way, I just heard the other day that certain cities banned governments from having conferences in Las Vegas, and that was disturbing to me because that's what we were thinking about doing next. But anyway, Bill Kellerman from San Diego, later the new commissioner from New York City, my successor, Mayor Joshi, will be here. We have Maria Guerra from the city of Chicago, who's going to be on our panel. Kyle Cochran from Hillsborough County. Deloise Watson-Brown and Mr. Mack from Atlanta, Frank Dufay from Portland, Dale Finch from Atlantic City, Madeline Farley from Nassau County in New York, and we also have people from overseas. Unfortunately, our representative from Singapore wasn't able to make it, but we have our good friends, Bill and Paul from Australia joining us. We have Yusrina Zina from Malaysia. We also have Sergey from Russia, the Russian Federation. Sergey, you here? There you are. And he has a translator and everything. Welcome. We have Rafael Grasse from Milan, Italy, as well. Rafael, welcome. And we have Ahmed Aboud from the Emirates National Group from the Middle East. We have Terry Thompson from Niagara Falls, Grant Wilson from Minneapolis, Bob Pearson from Michigan DOT, John Popplestone from Calgary, Shelley Sutherland from Saskatoon, and LaRonda Talton from Cleveland, and there's more, and we'll be announcing them as they file in. The original founding father of the Americans with Disabilities Act, U.S. Senator Tom Marlin.
Hi, I'm Senator Tom Marlin. First of all, thank you for inviting me to address your 27th annual conference. I regret that I can't be with you in New Orleans, but I do appreciate this opportunity to join you by this video. Let me first extend special greetings to some of the leaders, IATR President Matthew Dallas, IATR Board Chair Whisper, and IATR Board Member Malachi Hall, your host here in New Orleans. Over the years, I've worked to improve access for people with disabilities to all modes of transportation, including buses, trains, planes, and taxis. As many of you know, from its earliest days, the disability rights movement focused on access to transportation. In the 1960s, as public transit systems expanded, people with disabilities were often, figuratively and literally, left behind because they could not access a bus, a train, a subway, or a trolley. Early disability protesters such as Bob Kafka, also Bob Coward, a great disability advocate from Washington, D.C., who unfortunately just passed away this month, they advocated passionately for access to public transportation. When we passed the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990, we worked to dismantle this barrier. Not only a barrier to free movement, but also a barrier to employment, to healthcare, education, all of the essential functions of daily life. Now, this issue is so important that transportation had its own section in the ADA, Title II, Part A, Subpart 1. And our work together has been enormously successful. Today, thanks to the ADA, most transit systems in the U.S. are accessible to people with disabilities. Here in Washington, D.C., the Metro subway system is a shining example of our national progress in making transportation more accessible. All Metro trains are accessible. All Metro stations have elevators for access by passengers with disabilities. Now, these accessible features are identical not only to those with disabilities, but to the entire community. For example, elevators that provide access to subway platforms also improve access for parents with small children in stores, travelers with wheeled suitcases, and bicyclists who bring fast onto the subways. We're seeing more subway and train stations offering added accessibility features such as flashing light signals to alert people who are deaf that a train is approaching. We see physical modifications such as textured platform edges that help those who are blind or visually impaired to know that they're approaching the edge of the platform. Audio alerts let all riders know when train doors are opening and closing and which stop is next. Many train systems now include visual displays that indicate upcoming stops. All of these so-called disability features actually help all of us as we travel about. Now, in an area that we did not address in the ADA, unfortunately, we are now seeing substantial progress in making taxis and for-hire transportation more accessible. Last December in New York City, the Taxi and Limousine Commission, the mayor's office, and the disability community finalized an agreement that will make 50% of all taxis in New York City accessible by 2020. In Washington, D.C., we have also made progress. The Disability Taxi Cab Advisory Committee has recommended a goal of 40% accessible taxis by 2018, and a long-term goal of 100% accessibility. And of course, with the emergence of new transportation models such as Uber and Lyft, we need to determine how those services are held to the same standards of accessibility. So I commend IATR for addressing this issue. I look forward to your suggestions for making all ground transportation available and accessible to people with disabilities. I thank you again for inviting me to speak. Thank you for being such great partners in making transportation accessible for all. As you all know, I'm retiring from the Senate this year, but I'm not retiring from this fight and this effort. I will continue to work in this area of accessibility and transportation people with disabilities in the future. So look at it this way, I'm getting rid of a lot of other stuff I have to do in the Senate to focus on the things I really love and care about, and this is one. So I look forward to working with you even on into the future. So I wish you all a successful conference. Enjoy New Orleans. I guess I'd say let the good times roll for everyone, including those with disabilities. Have a safe trip home, everyone.
There you have it. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of this first panel. His name is Jason Michel. He is the former General Counsel and Commissioner for the New York City Mayor's Office of People with Disabilities. I'm proud that he is joined my law firm as counsel, where he practices disability law and transportation. Great lawyer, an excellent, dedicated former public servant who has served as pro bono volunteer counsel to the IATR's Accessibility Committee for the last year, and is really not the committee's the architect, but he was the draftsman and the person that brought it all together. A tremendous amount of work went into these model regs that we'll be having a hearing on tomorrow, and Jason has been pretty much a part. We worked very closely together when I was taxi commissioner, and even after I left with my successor, on every single disability rights issue in the city of New York he was a part of. Not just taxis, everything. A complete rewrite of the building code in New York City. This is really his turf, and I can't think of a better person to moderate this panel and to hear about all the great things that are going on in a different perspective. So it's my pleasure to welcome Jason Michel.
Thanks, Matt. That was a great introduction. My parents would be very, very proud. So, welcome to New Orleans, or as I like to call it, the greatest city where if you have a conference, you're going to be giving a presentation the first thing in the morning the next day after you arrive. And I get to do it twice, so good for me. Anyway, we are here to talk about accessibility in transportation, which is arguably the most important topic out there. Obviously, the IATR has dealt with many other important issues, TNCs, things like that, but I'm an advocate for the disabled 10 years as the General Counsel and Commissioner at one time of the Mayor's Office of People with Disabilities, which was created by executive order to advocate for the disabled. And I did that in a number of areas: housing, education, employment. Transportation was tied with housing for the most challenging. And I'm going to give you now an overview of accessibility in taxi cab, for hire vehicle, paratransit, with the New York City slant, because that's where I come from. And you'll see why it is challenging, continues to be challenging, although strides are being made. It's about time, quite frankly, and I think it's going to lead to increased accessibility around the world. In fact, we have panelists that you're going to hear from today from Australia, Canada, Chicago, and these model regs that Matt was speaking about that we're going to present tomorrow really were an attempt to take the best out of what many jurisdictions do and plug holes into things that maybe jurisdictions are not looking at, and we're hoping that that will snowball into something that jurisdictions will follow, and it will make this world a better place. So let's get on with the PowerPoint. So this is an overview of current accessibility issues in the taxi cab for hire vehicle paratransit industries. Picture of me there, picture of the accessible cab, taxi cab. So let's get started. Now, we just saw Senator Harkin, so I think it's only appropriate that we start here with a statement about the Americans with Disabilities Act, which he helped create. The Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in, among other areas, public and private transportation. So when we're looking at how the issues surrounding accessible taxi cabs and for-hire vehicles here in this country, we start with the ADA. Here's some important points about the ADA with respect to public and private transportation. One is there's no requirement for taxi fleets to be fully accessible, or that they must provide a minimum number of accessible vehicles. So right away, there's a challenge built in. The statute provides that it's not going to discriminate against people with disabilities. Taxis were left out. Secondly, a taxi cab or for-hire vehicle passenger, however, cannot be discriminated against due to his or her disability and must be provided this service at the same cost. So when I say left out, I just meant in terms of requiring fleets to be accessible. However, you cannot discriminate against a passenger of a taxi cab or for-hire vehicle. Three, if a vehicle is purchased for use as a taxi cab that is not considered an automobile, such as a minivan, that vehicle must be accessible unless the provider can prove it is providing the equivalent service under the equivalent service standard. Now, I'm not going to get into the equivalent service standard, but what I do want to talk about, and I'm going to talk about shortly, is this point about if you're providing public transportation and you're using a minivan that's not an automobile, that has to be accessible. And you're going to see in a few minutes how that works with the first point, which is there's no requirement for a taxi fleet to be fully accessible or providing accessible vehicles. It's interesting how these two will interplay. The fourth point I'd like to make is any public entity that operates a fixed route system must provide paratransit or other special service to people with disabilities that is comparable to the level of service provided to people without disabilities who use the fixed route system. Fixed route meaning something like the subway that has actual routes, stops along the way. So for instance, in New York City, we have a subway system, but it's not fully accessible. So we have a paratransit system. And I'll be talking more about paratransit a little bit. So the question is, why is there no mandate in the ADA for passenger vehicle fleets to be fully accessible? If it's supposed to protect against discrimination, why did they just say all taxi fleets have to be? Well, the U.S. Department of Transportation contributed language to the ADA, and they determined that it would be unreasonable to enforce such a requirement. The translation of that is accessibility is expensive. Now, when I say accessibility is expensive, I actually had a conversation the other day with someone who's going to be contributing to the model regulations, and this is a conversation we've had in the past with advocates, where if you say accessibility is expensive, many advocates find that to be offensive because there's many ways to provide accessibility without spending costs, which is true. Built into the ADA, for instance, is the concept of reasonable accommodations or equivalent facilitation. An example would be if you have a building that has stairs and you need to provide a ramp. Instead of, let's say, engaging in thousands of dollars in construction costs to get rid of those stairs, you could have a properly sloped portable ramp that you could put out there as long as it meets the grade. You now have a solution that comes at a lot less cost. There's a lot of solutions like that throughout the ADA and throughout building codes and things like that. But as I told this person, in the area of transportation, you really cannot get around the fact that accessibility is expensive. You just can't. We're talking about vehicles here. Vehicles in and of themselves are expensive. It's just a fact of life, and the way that I am going about it is that you just have to tackle that challenge head on. So I don't mean to be offensive by saying accessibility is expensive because, like I said, there's plenty of ways to meet accommodations without spending the money, but in this area, it's unavoidable. So I come from New York City, and my experience has been that our city gets followed as far as what we do in accessibility and a lot of other things because we're a big city and popular. But why is New York City followed by other jurisdictions in the area of passenger car service? Well, the New York City metropolitan area contains over 60% of the passenger car service industry in North America and over 30% of the industry worldwide. The total number of licensed, and there's some text message, but the total numbers of licensed and regulated vehicles that New York City has is about 60,000 vehicles. I was actually having a conversation yesterday with my friend Mark Klein who's here about how there's some jurisdictions who they really shouldn't follow New York because New York is a unique city. We're a very, very big city. And there's other cities that have different unique qualities and have their own ways of doing things that could very well be better for them, which I do agree with. My point here is just that because we have so many taxis and it's so much a part of our public transportation infrastructure that jurisdictions just tend to kind of look to us and see what we're doing, and they'll either follow or leave or they won't, but New York City is a good place to start. So I'm going to tell you a little story. This is the story of how New York City's taxi fleet will be 50% fully accessible by 2020, despite the ADA not mandating fully accessible fleets or minimum requirements. I'm sure that some of you in this room know this story, so I apologize if you've been down this road, but there's many here I guess have not. And it's a very interesting story, and I was heavily involved in it, so I'm going to tell you. So step one is a lawsuit. It's usually how these things start. In fact, New York City's, all their buses are accessible. That started with a lawsuit. So in 2011, which history will show was a banner year for accessible taxis in New York City for a number of reasons. In 2011, advocates for the disabled sued the city in a case called Knoll versus the TLC, which is the New York City Taxi and Museum Commission, claiming they were denied meaningful access to the city's taxi fleet, which at the time contained 231 out of 13,437 taxis, 1.8%. They kind of had a point. But after winning, they did win the lower court, but it was appealed, and the judge ruled that the New York City Taxi and Museum Commission is not required under the ADA to mandate a fully accessible fleet or require a minimum number of vehicles to be accessible, as I said before, because that's what the U.S. Department of Transportation, who had helped write the ADA, put in there. So, step two, in that same year, New York City launches what they call the Taxi Tomorrow program, which many of you have heard of, whereby it chooses one manufacturer to provide the majority of the city's taxi fleet. The vehicle that was chosen, the Nissan NV200, is a vehicle that Nissan itself describes as a van, which we'll start talking about in a minute. Going back to that first slide when I said how the 2 points will interplay between the ADA not requiring if you're going to provide public transportation and you're providing a van, it has to be accessible. So advocates seeing that say, hey, wait a minute, you're providing a van. ADA says you provide a van, it's got to be accessible. Well, we're going to go to court and we're going to file for summary judgment and say, now, New York City, you chose a van, your whole fleet now, or as many taxis as they were going to be getting, the Nissan meaning they have to be fully accessible. Pretty good argument, I would think. I happen to be a litigator, and that's how I would litigate it. Step 3, 2011 still, government legislation. 2011, December 2011, and Senator Harkin referred to this in his excellent speech. After negotiations between the New York City Mayor's Office, the New York State Governor's Office, and advocates for the disabled, Governor Cuomo signs into law the Street Hail Delivery Law, which allows the city to sell 2,000 yellow medallions, all of which must be for accessible taxi cabs, meaning they're putting 2,000 accessible taxi cabs on the street, 18,000 permits for green taxi cabs, and 20% of which were mandated to be accessible, 3,600 out of 18,000. That can pick up street hails in the 4 boroughs not named Manhattan, meaning the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island, because they did not have, at the time, the hail service. You have to call a car service to get transportation. However, I've gone to Brooklyn before, and there will be some cabs around there. There were some cabs around you can get, but for the most part, much of New York City's population did not have access to going out on the street and hailing taxis, so this was a big deal. The reason why this legislation happened is because, as you probably know, in 2008, this country experienced an economic problem, and even though Mayor Bloomberg was smart enough to put away a lot of money over the years for a rainy day, we went through that money, and he saw that there was going to be a hole in the budget. It was about $1 billion or so. So the mayor decided, well, how am I going to plug this hole? Hey, here's a great idea. I need to sell more taxi medallions, because these medallions go for a lot of money. So he said, hey, let me go talk to the government and see what I can do. But here's what's interesting. You might be saying to yourself, wait a minute. You just told us in the previous slide that the city's being sued because it's not providing full access to its taxi fleet for people with disabilities. And now you're telling me that the mayor went to the governor and they came up with this legislation which increased accessibility to the taxi fleet. So what's going on here? Why are you saying that the city's being sued, yet there's legislation that's saying here? Well, the only answer I can really give you is that I have to, unfortunately, qualify this. As a former public servant, when you leave public office, you're not allowed to do certain things. I'm not allowed to, let's say, contact my agency to do business with them. It's a conflict of interest. Another thing I'm not allowed to do is talk about confidential information. So I can't really comment on why there is a difference there. The only thing I will say is that when the governor announced this legislation, I was the commissioner at the time. I was sitting at home watching this on television, and the governor was surrounded by advocates for the city, say to one no, but I was not there. You can draw your own conclusions from that. That's the only thing I can really say about that. But anyway, in order for the city to be allowed to sell all of these medallions and to make all this money and plug the hole in the budget, it has to submit to the New York State Department of Transportation a long-term disability plan. So now you have a lawsuit going on, you have this legislation providing more accessibility. However, in order to maximize all of these sales, they have to submit this plan. So let's go to step 4. Both sides of the link, meaning the lawsuit, there is a settlement. Basically, as I said before, you have the ADA, which says no mandate for fully accessible taxi fleet, nor is there a mandate for a minimum requirement for the number of taxis that need to be accessible in the fleet. New York City makes the decision to award most of its medallion, taxi fleet medallions to one company that is providing arguably a van, and the ADA says if you're going to have a van, it's got to be accessible. So we're coming to the end of this lawsuit. Nobody knows what's going to happen. And each side is thinking, this judge is either going to say, hey, New York City, listen, not my problem. You provided a van, it's got to be accessible. Or the judge is going to say, 88 clearly says, no minimum requirements for taxi accessibility, so sorry, advocates. So both sides say, wait a minute, we don't know which way this is going. Let's come together, let's split it in half, let's go 50-50. And that's exactly what happened. So the judge preparing the rule, whether this 10-200 is a ban, which if he uses a taxi cab must be accessible, New York City and the plaintiffs reach a settlement agreement and a 50% accessibility by 2020. So that's how you get accessibility these days. You get a lawsuit, and then you get, what I find very interesting about this is when Taxi Tomorrow came out and they awarded this to Nissan, advocates were very, very upset because at the time, we did not have an accessible version of that vehicle. They do now. They work with Braun, a great company, but they, at the time, they were completely against this entire concept. But because the concept happened, it forced, well, there was already a lawsuit, but it forced the hands of the city and the advocates to come to the table to make this happen. So if there was not a Taxi Tomorrow, yes, the lawsuit could have still gone on, yes, the legislation, but in my opinion, the Taxi Tomorrow actually helped out and turned out to be a boon for accessibility, because now we have a 50-50 split, and this helps out anybody who's in the accessibility game. If you're a retrofit, if you're producing a vehicle that's accessible, now you have a lot more opportunities, and like I said earlier, a lot of jurisdictions can follow what New York City's doing. So it turned out to be a good thing. Arguably, but it did. All right, so that's my story about the accessible taxi fleet in New York City. Now I want to talk a little more about the industry in general and the costs associated with it. So why is accessibility expensive in the taxi and for hire vehicle industry? Well, I'm probably telling you things that you already know. Larger vehicles that you need to accommodate wheelchairs and scooters. Bigger vehicle, more expensive it's going to be. They use more gas. That's more money. More maintenance required for parts and services like ramps, more money. Technology required to accommodate the needs of people with other disabilities, people who are blind, or vision, deaf, or have hearing loss. Again, more money. It is what it is. But why is accessibility even more expensive in paratransit? I was referring to paratransit earlier as something that's a mandate for cities that have a fixed route system, like a subway. Well, New York City's fixed route system is not fully accessible. Subways, like I said. So, the New York City Paratransit must provide a comparable service to people with disabilities in a metropolitan area that covers approximately 305 square miles. So you think about that for a minute and all these, and you see a picture, a real picture of what one of our accessorized vehicles. It's not an exact accessorized vehicle, but they tend to look like that. These are driving all around New York City. You see them everywhere you go. If you're 85 square miles of land, they have to cover. These are very large vehicles, like minibuses, and they accommodate many passengers. Again, that means more money. Door-to-door service that this thing provides in some cases. So imagine you're going from one end of the southern end of Staten Island to the northern end of the Bronx. And cost to the passengers out of the subway fare, but it was about $250, but the program itself costs more than $380 million per year. So even though accessible taxis for hire vehicles have their own expensive implications, paratransit has it much more so, or at least more so. So how can accessibility be less expensive? How can we tackle this subject so we can provide more accessibility and lessen these costs? Well, here's a little self-promotion. Couldn't help myself. Matt Dawson and I did this article called Accessible Transportation Reform, Transforming the Public Paratransit and Private for Hire Ground Transportation Systems, which there should be a poster out there. We came up with some solutions, and I'm going to give you the solutions right now. And I'm not going to go very deep into detail because I'm going to get to the panelists, but So how can accessibility be less expensive or environmentally friendly? Well, one is to integrate on-demand accessible taxis into paratransit. If you bring accessible taxis into paratransit, you're talking about vehicles that are not as big. They reduce the average cost of the ride from 30 to 50 per passenger on average, sometimes it's higher, to about $12 to $15 per passenger, and it reduces the carbon footprint. So talking about a greener solution, which is interesting because in my experience at the mayor's office, there's always this battle between accessibility and environmentally friendly. Mayor Bloomberg was very pro-environmentally friendly, it was a more priority, and sometimes accessibility and environmentally friendly initiatives, they just don't jive together. However, this is one solution that in fact they do. It's a nice marriage here. Second, integrate accessible taxis into crew-range accessible transportation. In New York City, I'm not getting into it, but we have brokerage models that use ambulettes and brokers that farm out for people that have Medicaid and need non-emergency medical transportation. They farm out, again, larger vehicles, ambulettes, things like that. So for taxis there, again, less carbon footprint, less expensive. However, you still continue the utilization of these big multi-passenger vans for feeder and peak service. I mean, we all know that if we're sitting in traffic, it'd be better if there were less cars on the road. Well, there's less cars on the road if you're using one of these big buses because more people are using them. So use it for peak service when it's rush hour, or feeder service, which means you're not going door to door, you're driving somebody from a point to, let's say, an accessible subway. Or a bus stop or something. 4, utilize technology, including smartphone apps, digital dispatch systems, and regulatory dashboards such as carbon emissions calculators and monitoring systems. We have in New York City an accessible dispatch program, which we started as a pilot program back in 2007, and now it's a permanent program that's run by my friend Bill Scalzi out of Connecticut, Metro Taxi. It works great. They put GPSs on all of the accessible taxis. They know where they are. It's funded where the driver has to pick somebody up and they have to bypass things trying to LCAT based. The funding provides for what's called dead end fees. They get paid for that, so they're not going to avoid trying to pick somebody up who requests the fees. But also the carbon emissions calculators, this is something that San Francisco, I believe, uses, which is a great environmental way to show that, if you're using taxis instead of these buses, you're reducing the carbon footprint, which everybody wants. Smartphone apps, people are using them all the time to do everything, including reserve vehicles. And therefore, it just overall leads to a more efficient way to have access to accessible vehicles. And then 5, in order to fund this, the idea is to create funding mechanisms through what we call an accessibility lockbox. Meaning, every jurisdiction should have an agency that is overseeing accessible transportation, and that they would hold the money to fund accessibility initiatives. You can get this through a number of ways. A surcharge, for instance, I think Seattle has a surcharge, New York City has a surcharge. It's a small surcharge per trip. You can get money that way. Also, the savings I'm talking about with paratransit, you integrate taxis into paratransit system, the costs come down, and therefore you have extra money that you can use to fund accessible initiatives in transportation. And contributions from these transportation network companies, such as Lyft, Uber, these companies that unfortunately, in some cases, are trying to skirt by regulations that apply for properly licensed regulators who really are following laws that just are there to protect passengers, to make sure cars are built well, driving and trained properly. And so these companies that are trying to get into the business and in some cases not doing the right thing, they should be mandated to contribute money towards this lockbox to help out in funding accessible initiatives. This is my final slide, and I'm going to turn it over to the rest of the panel, just to give you an idea of paratransit costs. Fiscal year 14, $258 million was funded by the Federal Transit Administration for paratransit. It's a lot of money. 2013 survey, 24.9 million riders used paratransit throughout the country, over 7,000 vehicles. In New York City, paratransit subsidized costs are more than $60 per passenger. Point-to-point transportation by taxi cab for a higher vehicle paratransit costs less than $15 per passenger. It's a big cost savings, which is why I say the result, the integration of taxi cabs and higher vehicles and paratransit will result in astronomical savings. So that is my PowerPoint, that's my overview of what's going on in New York City. I hope you learned something from it. I'm really happy that accessibility is on the rise in our city. It's about time. So I want to introduce Carl Mortimer. He came all the way from Australia, from Adelaide, along with his colleague Bill Giannis, and although he's been on holiday in Canada, but we're very happy to have him here. He helped out with the model race, which I'm going to be talking about tomorrow. So please give a warm welcome to the man from down under, Mr. Carl Mortimer. Thanks.
I didn't pack a PowerPoint with me, but I'll talk very briefly about what's happening in Australia, and primarily what's happening in Adelaide, where I come from. If you think of Australia and the map of Australia, and down the bottom there's a great big chunk that's taken out. That's actually called the Great Australian Bight, and our city is on the eastern side of that chunk out of the bottom of Australia. So that's where we're from. In Australia, there was the Disability Discrimination Act that came into being in 1992, 2 years after the American Disability Act. It's a complaints-based act, and it didn't have any real definitions around it or regulations around it. So in the mid-1990s, a group from our city in Adelaide challenged that act in regard to public transport and lodged some complaints. So the governments around Australia then got together and put some standards around public transport services. For taxis, there is no substitution. You can't have a paratransit system for taxis. Taxis have to meet accessibility requirements. But again, like Jason was talking about, it didn't specify a number of taxis that needed to be accessible. It talked about dimensions for wheelchair space within the vehicles. It talked about doorway heights and widths, hoists, ramps, weight capacity, and so on. And the one thing that it did do was it said that accessible taxis, without naming how many you had to have equivalent response times to genuine taxis. Now, over the years, that has been a problem for the taxi industry, and not a problem, an issue for the taxi industry and the regulators to try and achieve. Because what is an equivalent response time? In Australia, the market is largely a 50-50 split between booked services and hailed services off the street. Some cities, that's a bit different. So in the Gold Coast, where there's the theme parks and beaches and all of that sort of stuff, the holiday destination, most of the taxis are accessible, largely because they want to have room to take people's suitcases and so on when they arrive for their holidays. But in cities such as ours, what does equivalent response times actually mean? And we've had a few reviews of the standards because we, regulators and industry, were meant to meet that standard by 2007. Now, it wasn't met. There was a review of the standards in 2012, and it's still going on, and there's still debate as to whether that measure or that standard should be replaced with a standard that talks about a number or percentage of taxis in the fleet that should be accessible. And I think the only way you might be able to do that is to do the New York way and have a large amount of taxis that are accessible, 50% or more. In our state, in our city, it's a small city. It's 1.5 million people. We've achieved it by having conditions around licences or medallions that actually say that a wheelchair accessible taxi cannot do general taxi work during certain hours of the day, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Can't do general taxi work. Has to only do wheelchair work. And then, if it's out on the road after those times, it must do wheelchair work first. Other states haven't done that. They aim for a percentage of taxis, and they say that the wheelchair taxis have to get priority. Well, that could mean they do 1 wheelchair job a day, or 2 wheelchair jobs a day. But in our model, we've found that we've got about 9% of our fleet accessible, so we've got 100 wheelchair accessible taxis out of 1,023 general taxis. But we've reached equilibrium because the more, as we put on extra taxi licences that are accessible, the number of accessible jobs per taxi goes down. And so viability is becoming an issue for the wheelchair accessible taxis because the market isn't growing, and that's largely because the governments in Australia pay a subsidy for people with disabilities to travel in taxis, and that hasn't increased. So the number of trips people are doing hasn't increased, and the number of people with disabilities requiring wheelchairs hasn't increased to the extent that it requires additional taxis to be put on. We've found that in our system, unless you go to the New York model or the other cities' models where they're putting on quite large numbers of taxis, it's not a case of numbers of taxis equal service, because what the other states find is those taxis prefer to do the easy work of doing the work without assisting people with disabilities. The issues, as Joseph raised, smartphone apps. Our accessible taxi fleet has their own smartphone app, but with Uber and, in our case, GoCatch, which operate outside the regulatory environment, illegally, if you like, they're taking the cream work off the real taxis, the real taxi booking services, and there's no accountability for wheelchair accessible work. So in other words, our wheelchair taxis could be doing that sort of work and hiding.
All right, next up, according to my buddy Jason here, my esteemed colleague from Chicago, my second favorite city, other than New York City, Commissioner Maria Garolabachek. Please welcome her, and she's going to talk about Chicago and accessibility.
Thanks, everyone. I just wanted to say, I'm very happy I actually got Jason to admit that, Jason who's a Chicagoan, to admit that Chicago Peace is actually better. So, Mayor Daniels can be very proud of you when I go back home. So, good stuff. So we, at the Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection, we're a consolidated department. The department is made up of business licensing as well as business regulation. We have inspectors that go out and regulate unstamped cigarettes, outdated food, mispriced baby formula, things like that on shelves. We also regulate cable. We do a number of things in addition to the public vehicle licensing and regulation. Our public vehicle operations division, we have 12,000 public vehicles in Chicago. We not only license taxi cabs, but basically anything that carries people. There's, in terms of taxi cabs, about 6,800 currently active licenses. We have about 7,000 medallions that were authorized by law that are available. There were 385 taxi cab medallion transfers, and the important part of that is that we have a small tax on the transfer. We have our public vehicle inspection facility has about close to 20,000 inspections annually, and this is a large part of our work as well. We traffic all the consumer complaints. Just to give you a little bit of overview, I'm going to talk about just our reforms that we did in 2012. Dealt a lot with green taxis as well as the wheelchair accessible vehicles. And I know that folks call them WAVs, some people call them waves. I kind of like waves better, but each person pronounces it how they like. So in terms of our taxi incentives, in our 2012 reforms, we built in incentives to try to get people to, medallion owners to purchase green vehicles. And we didn't really say which green vehicles, but just any kind of alternative fuel vehicle. The success of this has been tremendous. We have an abundance of green taxis in our fleet now, what we didn't before. And obviously the benefits of green taxis, there's a lot of benefits to the environment as well as to folks' pocketbooks. So now to the matter at hand. In our reforms, we also built in some accessibility reforms. Currently, we just did a new ordinance for the transportation network provider vehicles. In that ordinance, we included a new reform to increase the number of WAVs or waves. We now say if you have more than 10 medallions, 10% of your fleet now needs to be wheelchair accessible. And the important part about this is that in Chicago, we do have a lot of large fleet owners. So this is one way that years past we thought of how to increase the waves on the street. We also have a wheelchair accessible fund where under the old reform we didn't allow to be used for the mandated wave vehicles, and we will be allowing that going forward. We have a really great program where we give one medallion away to a driver. We collect nominations, recommendations. This past year's winner, I have to say, was really kind of touched my heart tremendously. He was a gentleman who I got the most recommendations for. In fact, one of them was the most compelling. It was a woman who wrote that her husband, before he passed away, asked her to please not forget to write in a recommendation for this gentleman so that he can win the award. When you get a nomination from the grave, you can't ignore that. In addition to that, he came in and talked about how he made this a business. He wasn't performing charity. He respected the individuals in wheelchairs just like everyone else, and said they want service, they need service just like everyone. He built up a very large clientele that, in fact, in some cases called him directly when they couldn't get through the dispatch. So he was chasing fares all over the city. I thought that was a very good story for people to hear. I don't want people to think that driving a wheelchair accessible vehicle is a charity. It's not. It's a business, and people should treat it that way. And he's able to support his family and put his kids through college driving a wheelchair accessible vehicle. So needless to say, he won the award. It was a really great event. Our reforms, as you can see, produced a lot, between 2011 and 2012, increased the number of WAVs on the street. Right now, the number of waves that we should have on the street is 125, but we actually have 163. A large part of that is that if you have a wheelchair accessible vehicle, you have 7 years to keep your vehicle on the street versus the 4 years that we currently give you for a gasoline vehicle. If you have an alternative fuel vehicle, you have 6 years of life. Wheelchair accessible vehicle is 7 years of life. However, you can apply for pretty much unlimited so long as the vehicle continues to pass inspections. In the reforms that started in 2015, we're taking into our wheelchair accessible fund not only money from the taxi companies, they pay us $100 a year for every taxi that is not wheelchair accessible for their annual license. In addition to that $100 a year for taxis, we're going to be taking in anywhere between either $25 or $100 for every TMP vehicle that is not accessible. And we built this into our TMP ordinance that we just passed and just went into effect at the beginning of September. We work with a centralized dispatch. We work with Open Taxi, which is a for-profit arm of a nonprofit organization called Open Doors. They train folks how to deal with the disabled. Our centralized dispatch works by phone and with an app. They are up and running, and from everything I've heard, their services dramatically have been improved. Our current wave fund is $1.6 million of money that we take from the taxis, and then we also got a grant, which actually includes a local match that we put up. So right now we are sitting on a pretty sizable wave fund to get more wheelchair accessible taxis onto the street. The incentive program that we had isn't really bringing people forward, and I think part of that was we weren't allowing people to use it for the mandated wave vehicles, but we will be able to move forward for the 10% requirement. So we're also working on, we have a task force made up of members of the disability community so that they gave us ideas on how they can more. We talked to people in the taxi community about why this wasn't enough of an incentive to have people come in to either purchase vehicles or convert their vehicles. So the grant that we got was, part of the safety room legislation. I know that other cities got this grant as well. There are complex regulations when dealing with federal grants. There's that Buy American mandate, and then there's tons of strings attached with respect to procurement rules that have to be followed. And we can be reached through any of our social media and website. We've been very active now, especially working with the taxi community on social media. We send notices through Facebook and Twitter, and that's been very successful. So that's me, and Google Bobbitt, who is our deputy, who is over all of public vehicles, is also here at the conference with me. So if you have any questions, please feel free to see either one of us. Thank you.
I forgot to mention when I was speaking, New York City lost a tremendous advocate for the disabled a few days ago, a guy by the name of Terry Moakley, who was a tireless advocate for accessibility transportation. I had the pleasure of working with him a number of times. In fact, my greatest moment with Terry was, it was not transportation related, but New York City passed this law back in 2005 to provide a rent increase exemption to people with disabilities, where it was only provided for senior citizens. It was a battle that was being fought for about 25 years or so, and what I did was I brought Terry and other advocates to City Hall to sit down, and so the Office of Management and Budget, the people that control the money in the city, could look them in the eye and tell them that they weren't going to enact this law. And of course, that strategy worked because they passed the law. So I miss Terry, and he was a good guy. Third is, right now, before I turn it over to one of my Canadian colleagues, if anyone has any questions, feel free. Otherwise, what we're going to do is, at the end of the session, we have these microphones we're going to pass into the audience for anybody that wants to comment on what their jurisdictions are doing and what they see trends are, and or if they want to make any general comments regarding what we're talking about. So, yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Mike Gioa from Golden St. John's. Maria, I just had a question about the type of entry that you required for the vehicle. A side entry as opposed to a rear entry. What was the thinking behind that?
Can you hear me? Hello? I think you can hear me, yeah. It is a side entry currently.
I wasn't around at that time, but I can find out for you and get an answer
Thank you.
what the idea was.
And I can actually comment a little bit on that, just in the New York experience, in my experience with advocates. Basically, if you ask most advocates, a lot of advocates prefer side entry. They prefer it because they feel in a rear entry situation, they're treated like luggage. They don't like that feeling, and they also feel that it's unsafe because somebody could crash into the car from behind. However, as I've explained to advocates, in New York City, for instance, it's very difficult to have a side entry vehicle because there's not a lot of loading points. You have a lot of cars on the street. At the same time, the idea is to get accessible vehicles out there to be able to transport people from point to point that did not have it beforehand. There's plenty of great companies doing great work making rear entry vehicles as well as side entry vehicles. And I know personally people who are wheelchair users who don't mind using rear entry vehicles. So my comment is always that the market will work it out, and the more the merrier. And I don't believe in mandates because, again, in New York City you have a certain, it'd be very difficult to mandate one or the other because those same concerns that people have with rear entries, they're there, but with side entries it's very difficult in a lot of the city streets. I think you need both. There's times where a rear entry is a better way to go, and there's times where a side entry is a better way to go. But again, advocates will tell you a lot that they don't like the rear entry, but there's others that say that they're fine with it. One thing that I've learned is that people with disabilities are not necessarily a united group because everybody has their own. Well, sometimes the agendas are shared, sometimes they're not. My last point on that is I'll just give you a real world example. Matt made reference to the fact that I worked on the building code of New York City, which it was a new building code that we enacted in 2008. I was basically at a table where on one side of the table were the real estate interests, the landowners, and on the other side we could say the advocates. And this was a very, very tough negotiation because if you can imagine that for every inch you want to widen the door, multiply that by a skyscraper. It's very, very expensive. You're going to lose units. At the same time, we wanted to make a very accessible code that went above and beyond what the ADA provides. However, the advocates themselves were not united. You would have an advocate who would say, I don't want a fully accessible apartment because my rent is going to be too high. I only need an accessible roof. I might need one or two other things. And you'll have another advocate saying, no, I need everything. I need grab bars everywhere. I need the utmost top of the line accessible apartment. So that's just one real world example of how you had to have some compromises there in order to then come to the table with the landlords and make the code. In my opinion, it's the same thing with the rear side entry discussion. You're not going to please everybody, but the best solution is to provide as much transportation as you can, no matter what form it takes. Okay, so next up, does anyone else have any questions, or we'll keep moving on? Mr. Klein?
I just have one quick note because it's staring at us. So, remember when we said accessibility is expensive? You see that little blue diamond? So, all these pictures of wheelchair accessible taxis in Chicago have that little blue CNG diamond. And I was in a non-accessible taxi in Chicago once, and I pulled up to a natural gas wheelchair accessible taxi, and I said to my driver, hey, what's that ugly looking taxi next to us? Staring at the symbol for wheelchair accessibility. Expecting the driver to say to me, oh, that's a wheelchair accessible taxi. And instead the driver said, oh, that's a CNG taxi. And I said to myself, well, I think we've done it. We've taken a vehicle that drivers traditionally don't like to drive, which are wheelchair accessible taxis for reasons to know, and turned it into a money-saving taxi. So he's saving $1.50 a gallon, that driver, and he doesn't care who he takes, as long as he's making more money and taking the pay. So
Awesome, good point. Sir, Mr. Al Fromberg from the New York City Taxi and Leasing Commission.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I feel like Jason robbed me of most of what I could have said this morning because he was talking about New York City, but I just wanted to actually sort of clarify a couple of things. with all due respect to Jason's presentation, I just want to sort of slightly recharacterize something he said about the additional 2,000 medallions. Budget was certainly a consideration, and it's no secret that New York City benefits tremendously from the sale of medallions, but it was also the need for additional transportation. The law that Governor Cuomo signed at the time was also called the Five-Borough Taxi Program. And it was because we did a five-borough bond transportation sort of foundation program, which included Manhattan as well as the other boroughs that would be served by the new green taxis. So it was as much for the need for transportation to enhance the transportation network and the comprehensive network that taxis are so very much a part of, that were at least an equal reason to budget. The second thing is, I know you touched on it, but I wanted to just sort of expand a little bit on our accessible dispatch program. It started out with a 2-year pilot program, which taught us some tremendous lessons about what to do and what not to do, about providing accessible transportation. And we then took all those lessons back, we went to the drawing board, and we worked out what we think is a very successful and very useful accessible transportation system that today is providing between 150 and 200 trips per day that simply did not exist ever before. We partnered with our medallion taxi industry who are helping us by subsidizing the program. The TLC is administering it. Cindy Davidson is in charge of that program. She does an amazing job. I'm sorry I'm speaking for you, I shouldn't do that, but she does a terrific job. It's a good, successful program. It's thriving. Basically because we have, as a result of that settlement with the disability advocacy community, we have enhanced through our disability plan our green taxis to an eventual goal of 50% accessibility. So the 5 boroughs, the 4 other boroughs are covered. We are now providing accessible dispatch by phone and 4 other additional ways for people to get the service. In Manhattan for destinations anywhere in the city, we are using a terrific company to provide the dispatching services for us, Metro Taxi in Connecticut, as you mentioned, Bill Scalzi. It was a labor of love for us. And it's been a tremendous partnership with the industry, and it's been a tremendous success for us. So, thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Okay, so let's continue on now, and we'll get more questions at the end. I'm going to bring up from Regina Canada, sorry. Never been to Saskatchewan, but always wanted to go. And he helped me greatly with the model regulations we'll be presenting tomorrow. Please welcome Mr. Lauren Chow.
Hi. First question, where is Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada? It's in, we are a city of 200,000 people, and we have 190 taxis, 10 accessible taxis, and that number of accessible taxis will go up within the next couple of years. So in 2009, we hired a consultant. You may have heard the TTLF company. We commissioned them to undertake a comprehensive study of the taxi industry in Regina. And after about 3 years, it finally went to City Council and made some recommendations on taxis in general. It made recommendations like the taxi fare model, various items like the population ratio of 1 taxi per 1,250 residents, the age of taxis, so all those general terms of taxis in general. Now, this study didn't go into depth of accessible taxis since it was specialized. However, in 2013, in the second bullet, it indicates that we did a comprehensive review, and prior to that, we used the Regina City Priority Population Study as our basis for what's the comments of the disability community, what the needs are for accessible taxis. And prior to this year, we had only 4 accessible taxis in operation. So this year, in February, we completed the accessibility review, and we submitted a report to City Council, and made some recommendations to mirror our taxi regulations for the general public. And we dropped the rate of accessible taxis, so it charges the same amount as regular taxis. We introduced regulations on that they would have to accommodate service animals. So various things like, and also we're going to mandate the same rate as one taxi to 1,250 to the disability community, which is equivalent to 18. So eventually from 10 we'll reach 18 in hopefully in 2 years. And we also provided the same amount for age of the vehicles. So starting, they'll have the age of vehicles. You can't have more than a 10-year-old vehicle, and subsequently in 2016, so in the future, we've obviously we wanted to reach with the accessibility community, so we tried to reach out by participating with the committee, with the accessibility advisory committee and the Regina, the Human Rights Saskatchewan Accessible Transportation Stakeholder Advisory Committee. And we also participate with the Government of Saskatchewan Transportation Priority Working Group. These are important organizations that gather comments from various disability community. We also attend trade shows just to try to reach out to promote our accessible taxis. And so, like I said previously, we're going to try to achieve a goal of 18 within 2 years of having our fleet. And in addition, we'll collect the trip data on accessibility just to find out what the right number of taxis out there for accessible taxi cabs. And I'll take some questions. Very brief presentation.
John, I think people can hear me. It's a quick question.
Great. Sir. Brooke. I'm sorry.
I'm being prevented to use your...
No, I just don't want you to hurt your voice.
Trust me, I won't hurt it. At the time of the study, Saskatchewan and a few of the Canadian cities basically allowed the taxi companies to charge double the rate of regular fare for the handicap service. That was looked at in the study, but decided not to put it in the final report. But the official memo was, oh, that's not going to last very long. You literally have a sea of change coming, and that accessible cabs will be part of the fleet at some time in the future. And I think everyone there sort of knew that, but it was going to be difficult to move in that direction swiftly. But I think that has been eliminated. They cannot charge double the rate. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir, Mr. Lundy. This February, we prepared a report and it got approved by City Council that the drop rate is the same for accessible cab and regular cab.
That was made, but not publicly.
We're reaching out to the community to advertise that, so people are aware now. And we're trying to improve our communication with the customers, so if they have a complaint form, if they charge inappropriate fees, we'll find out, and we can revoke the taxi cab licenses.
Thank you. For a city of 200,000, you really have a great level of service for your taxi industry, and you work very well with it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chow. Appreciate it. Let's keep this moving. So my next presenter is another esteemed colleague from Canada, Montreal, I believe. And I want you to please give a warm welcome to Isabelle Ducharme.
Let me start by apologizing for the people on my right. When we decided where I was going to sit, we didn't realize that by standing right next to the speaking area, people on the right would not see me because of the nice little wooden piece beside me. You probably also don't see, but I am a person in a wheelchair. I'm in a motorized wheelchair. So I could tell you many stories about accessible taxis around the world, good and bad. I'm happy, however, to tell you that I was honored to be the first user of the first ever accessible taxi service to be done in the city of New Orleans, yet on Saturday. So things are moving and improving all the time. I'm here to speak more on behalf of Kebul, which is an organization, nonprofit organization that was founded in 1979. It was founded by Mr. Leclerc, that is still the owner and very active in the field. We are not a specific transportation organization, but we do have a mission of making tourism and culture accessible to people with restricted physical ability, which of course includes transportation. Just to give you a general idea of what we do, our key areas of action are evaluation and certification, hospitality training. We also develop tools to help people travel. So the one that we're mostly proud of is the Accessible Road, where you can go on the website and visit it. It's called theaccessibleroad.com. And also we do conduct market studies to see what works, what doesn't work, and what needs to be improved in the industry in general. Regarding transport, of course, I think everybody's going to agree, it's an essential service, whether for local people or for tourists, but specifically for people with disabilities. It gives us access to employment, care, leisure, tourism, and culture. Since 1979 in Quebec, the paratransit is financed by the government. It's a door-to-door service that is offered by minibuses, but not by taxis as well, that overcome the lack of vehicles for the paratransit. So that means 90% of the population of people with disabilities in the province is covered by the paratransit. Taxis equal 60% of paratransit transports in Quebec in general, but about 85% in Montreal. And you will see, as I go along with the presentation, that causes some problem for people wanting to use taxis for private reasons. So the service, like I said, is subsidized. Client admissibility is easier for locals. There can be some access for tourists, but not much because of the not enough vehicles. Service is available by reservation only, so that means there's no flag on the street, so there can be some wait time issue. The fare is the same as public transportation. The taxis paid by run hour are according to a contract. Train drivers, a big issue, very good thing that we are glad to have in the city and in the provinces. The drivers do have to have been trained on how to cater to that clientele. In general, the satisfaction level is high, and the paratransit program is considered a success in Quebec. There's little availability of accessible taxis, as I said, for private reservations. Accessible taxis have little availability to respond to private calls, mainly because they are hired by the public transit. And we think that public transit cannot replace taxi service because you do want to be able to use the service like anybody else and say, well, today I want to go for supper with my friend and not have to have reserved the day before. We have the right to the central link in the sorry, my slide is moving too fast for me. We do have the right to this essential link in the transportation chain. Why this lack of service? Is it a question of numbers, a question of demands, a question of legislation, business culture? Of course, it can be a mixture of all of this, but let's start with the numbers. In the city of Montreal, we have 319 accessible taxis. That's about 7% of the total availability of taxis. It's not much considering that they are subsidized. We did say before that it is expensive, but there is that help that is there. It is concentrated in a few businesses with institutional contracts, which means paratransit and hospital institutions. So that means they are not available for private calls. Is it a question of demand? According to taxis, there is little demand. Meanwhile, we keep hearing complaints of people wanting to go somewhere and calling for service and not getting it, or being told that, sorry, you should have called yesterday because we're too busy, we don't have enough drivers, all sorts of issues, keeping them from doing the request like anybody else would do. Some of them will automatically tell you that you should have called the day before. Some do apply surcharges if they had to wait because it took you a little longer to get out of the house, or if you need assistance, like holding on to the arm of the cab driver to get to the car. And it does, so these issues do not attract repeat business. People will not call back or will not use the service again. We mentioned the question, is it a question of demands again? We see this promotion here. Sorry, it's in French, but it basically tells you that you can use the private taxi service to do your shopping, to go see family, and so they do recognize that there is a need and there is a will to use the service. But then it tells you that it is available 24 hours a day, and that is not really applied all the time. There is some issues that, of course, if you want to go like everybody else during work hours, or if you want to have service, overnight service, you will have a hard time finding a taxi. Is it a question of legislation? There are, like I said, 219 accessible taxis with new restricted permits. Those permits forbid transporting passengers other than persons with disabilities. So how can that be profitable for a taxi driver if he can only do persons with disabilities, and that there will be times in the days where he would not do anything and he could do regular taxis, regular transportation, but because of these permits he can't. So how can he feel like he's going to get his money's worth, and it's going to be lucrative for him to do the accessible taxis if it's restricted? Finally, is it a question of business culture? Taxi is a fractional industry in which nobody is anybody's boss, nobody takes an initiative. The waiting post culture time comes to the youth and is used to no matter the quality of service provided. Legislation, audit authorities have to protect our market while the world and times are changing. We think it should be more open. So what we think are some of the solutions, transport legislations, which would be in the public interest, would be availability, security, fair, and quality. Another solution, access to service, which means mainly through intermediaries or call dispatch. Find another solution in these intermediaries' responsibilities to supply to the demand. How? Convince their members, hire competent drivers so that we get the repeat business, and obtain new permits that would be more permissive and more inclusive for everybody's in accordance to their needs. Towards the solution again, legislation could make it compulsory for intermediaries to offer accessible taxi services with a maximum of 30-minute wait period following the call. Right now, that is another big issue that we have. We can have an hour or 2 hours before we can have a taxi, right? And so that to us is not accessible, especially if you have local peoples know about it. They do prepare in case in case they have to go out. They will try and call way ahead of time. But when we get tourists that come from other places where they can have it quicker, they really don't understand this issue. Equivalent service and fare is offered to general population, so that would include the call time, but also the price that we will pay. And ensure that all taxi drivers take a training course on providing service to people with disabilities. Obviously, if you didn't have a training, if you're just starting in the business and you never had contact with people with disabilities before, you won't be comfortable, and there's more chance that you will do things the wrong way. Basic recommendations in general is to have, our basic recommendation is the 10% of a minimum number of accessible taxis, but a 10% increase throughout the years, because we see with all the statistics, there will be more and more people with disabilities, and so we need to increase all the time, not just set a number and leave it like that. Mandatory membership to a radio central, softening the rules related to restricted permits, broadcast of information regarding the rights of people with disabilities, and the ban of fare surcharges. So it's important to understand that it's not just it's not a charity, but it is really like a right to be able to have transportation just like anybody else. And work with a 3-year plan. Like I said, it's not just a matter of setting a regulation or making a decision, but understanding that things change. So you can't just sit on that law that you put or that decision that you made and think that it's good forever. So in conclusion, Québec is working really hard to improve the situation in Montreal, and for that, we are now part of the Taxi Bureau, and we did put our recommendation in, and we did get a good ear for that. But if you want to hear or read more about what we recommended, you can go on our website, and it's there. We think that these recommendations that we made are good for Montreal and can be good for many other places, and can be reproduced. Also, after 35 years of discussions towards the implementation of an accessible taxi service, it is time to take decisions required to ensure persons with disabilities have access to this essential service. And finally, Québec will be hosting its own summit on call destinations for all, where we will talk about tourism, culture, and transportation accessible taxis, but you are more than welcome to join us in Montreal in October. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel.
Good morning, everybody. Corporate transportation started in paratransit business a little bit more than 5 years ago. It was able to create a very successful model on a national level with a basic cost service provided paratransit service. And that model was extremely successful on various occasions where it was created in such a software that allows all advanced reservations and utilizing vehicles which probably consist of more than 75% hybrid, which is very, very important in this environment. Not only that we were able to achieve those goals, we also was able to create major cost saving to different cities on a national level. I'm very proud to say that today we're running one of the most successful operations in the country with over 1 million transfers per year on the last 4 years that we've been doing. And that gives ability for everybody to ride in all sorts of vehicles. We're also utilizing wheelchair accessible vehicles. Today in New York City, as we all know, there's a very successful green program, Green Medallions, which we're utilizing those vehicles as well. That gives ability to people to get a wheelchair accessible car as well. Corporate transportation group has continued to grow that business with a software that beyond that anybody could have done, we were luckily achieve homegrown solution to take this to every levels all over. And we're not only talking today on the national level, but we're talking international, and people are looking to expand this type of programs. And that's the most important thing today in this environment, how we can achieve tremendous cost savings and have a green program in place. At this point, we will continue to grow our solution in every city on the national level, and we're proud to say that. Thank you very much. I understand it's a little bit of short time, so enjoy the rest of the convention. Thank you.